All right, so we hit record. I'm here with Bryce Hansen, and we're gonna get going, and I'll do an intro later. But as of right now, we are we're going, and this is Zen and call signs. So, Bryce, first question for you is, what's your favorite artist or piece of art, or what do you have?
What do I have?
Oh no,
I don't.
what's your favorite artist or what's your favorite like artistic style or where do you go from there? Like what inspired you to become an artist?
Oh, well, those are very, very different questions.
All right,
Um,
well then let's answer them all.
I'll try to knock it out. All right. So, what inspired me to be an artist? All right. So, just like every other kid, man, I think. Well, this is a more philosophical answer. I think everybody could be an artist. I remember growing up, and I remember staying home from school sick, and besides watching The Price is Right and Press Your Luck, no whammies, big bucks. Besides watching that, I remember watching this cooking show, this Asian guy, and his tagline was, "If I think his name was Juan, if Juan can cook, so can you."
Right.
So
Yeah.
everybody out there is that of my age that remembers that stuff, right? I wouldn't even know the name of the show, but I extrapolate that and say, look, I think every kid is an artist. I think every adult who isn't an artist just lost that child artist along the way. I was drawing and doing all that stuff in high school, elementary school, just like everybody else. I just didn't stop. And I would travel the world. I was in the army and I got stationed in Korea. I got stationed in Germany. And so I was traveling. I had no really desire to come back to the United States.
Hmm.
So I was traveling all over the world and I was just taking my sketch pad with me. And, some people collect magnets, some people collect postcards, and I would collect sketches. So I'd sit in front of La Familia Sangria, which is in Barcelona, which it looks like Dr. Seuss made a cathedral, on
Yeah.
acid.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, but instead of actually going inside and doing the tour, I sat outside and sketched it for like 4 hours. It was the last sketch that I did. And I had been to 20 plus countries sketching, and like later that afternoon my bag got stolen and
Hmm.
my sketch was in it,
Hmm.
and I stopped drawing. I was just so, I'd invested so much into this sketchbook,
Well,
that I just stopped for years, and I
dude,
picked
that
it back.
sketchbook is gonna be like auctioned off later when you're dead for like a 10 million, bro. So it's okay.
And they dumped the rest of it in a dumpster somewhere.
Ah,
Thank goodness
maybe.
that never surfaced, because the early years were just. I remember bringing my sketch pad home one time, and I was trying to work on figures, right? And so I was trying to draw female figures, and I'm showing my wife, and she's just like, "This is horrible. Like, are you kidding me?" And
Yep.
practice perfect. I've gotten a little bit better. But yeah, I took maybe like 10 years off of any kind of art, and I just, when I was getting out of the army, uh, I found I had a lot of time available to me, and so I just started, and I found painting was much faster, and so I had all these ideas in my head, and so I'm just like painting. So I switched over from drawing to painting just so I could get stuff on captured.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's kind of what inspired me to be an artist, was one, boredom, and I just never, besides that time when I was just depressed about not having having all this stuff stolen
Yeah.
from me.
Yeah.
Always been in it. Always felt the need to create. Whether that's, I just got to do something, right? I'm not somebody who can just sit on the couch and binge,
Yeah. Yeah.
TV show. Like, if I'm not doing something, being productive, I feel like horrible, right? And
Yeah.
so creating, whether that's painting or sculptures or just working in the garden, I got to be doing something with my hands, or my mind's not in the right place. As far as inspirations, one of the things that I was lucky enough to see, uh, that kind of like rekindled the idea of getting back into art, was this a little short cartoon clip. I don't know if a lot of people have seen it, or they should. There was a collaboration between Dolly and Disney.
Hmm. Okay.
It's a
Yeah, I've seen it. Yes, very interesting.
yeah.
And yeah, yeah,
Probably seen it, but it's like if Fantasia met surrealism, Or if people don't know what surrealism is, like if Mickey was on acid,
Yeah.
then that's like, but very creative, and it kind of rekindled. So I have to give credit to Dolly for inspired me to think outside the box and reimagine how things.
Yeah.
Um, but then
Because if
also
you're
like,
dreaming, right? Because I feel like that's
yeah,
where I like Jolly. You're like, man, I feel like that's dream, right? Because I've had, yeah. So
well, I think that there's, I mean, and I don't even know what it's called, that dream state where you're half awake, half asleep.
yeah,
But I've lost thousands of good ideas,
yeah,
artistic ideas, right? And it's like, it's when I'm my most creative, when my mind is free from the
yeah,
entrapment of life. And
yep,
it's, I have to remember this. And in some, it's same thing, I try to recapture it in the morning. If I don't have a dog or a kid, or work saying, hey, you got to get up. There's those
yeah,
magic
yeah,
moments,
yeah,
right? Because like, where do we go when we dream? Where's our soul go? Where does our brain go? And there's just this lucid moment that a lot of ideas come to me, and I start playing with them. I
yeah,
also suffer from migraines, and so when I do that, I go in a dark, quiet room, take my meds, and I might be out for anywhere from an hour to 8 hours, but that's also a great time for me to play with ideas and
yeah,
transition, work things in my head, and then cognizant enough to it during
yeah,
those times that I actually take notes. So
yeah.
that's kind of like the
Cool.
process where it came from. And
Do you have a favorite artist? Dolly? Anybody else?
not any names off the top of my head. I mean, there's a few artists that I was just actually cleaning my I go through phases. There's different people on Instagram that, and I wouldn't be smart enough to even say their names or the hashtag or
Yeah,
their,
yeah,
you call at number
same.
those.
Yep,
But like, I'll follow somebody for a year or two and absorb their content and be like, all right, I really like it, and then
yep.
I either use it or incorporate a piece of it and adjust my style a little bit,
Oh
or
yeah.
I get bored. I'm not gonna lie, I get bored of a lot of artists because I'm not gonna say any names because I don't want to bash on anybody. Somebody could easily level the same criticism at me,
Yeah.
but it's the same piece. It might be different
Mm.
colors, might be,
Yeah.
let's say, face art, right? Like if you're
Yeah.
doing a face, I'm always doing face this way, but I slightly do it this way. Is it really different? No, it's the same thing. But
Yeah.
I'm not the content, but I'm looking at the style, and I'm like, that's how you do. Because I view stuff art from artists when they do the time lapse things as
Yeah.
tutorials.
Oh
Oh,
yeah.
it demystifies the technique. I'm like, okay,
Oh yeah.
that's how you do that, because I have no formal training. So I'm like, okay. And so then I play
Yeah.
with the technique that I see on social media, and then I just kind of, if I like it, I make it my own. If I
Yeah.
master it, if I don't, then I might try it
Yeah.
on a few pieces. And I have a few pieces where I cram in as many different styles as I can,
Yeah.
being like, this is a junk painting anyways. I think a lot of the artistic process is experimenting
Oh.
and putting
Oh
yourself
yeah.
outside zones, or you quickly find yourself 20, 30, 50, 100 pieces in, and the first one and the last one are basically the
Mm.
same thing.
Yeah.
For me,
Yeah.
if I'm going to spend 20, 60 hours somewhere in there on a painting, I'm going to be invested in it, and I want to try something. I don't want to
Oh yeah.
feel like I'm a machine, and I'm not creating, I'm reproducing. I'm reproducing an idea onto canvas versus creating, which is a nuanced, right,
Yeah.
approach to it, but that's how I feel.
Yeah. That's why I sent those paintings, bro. So I want to see what you got for those. So I'm kind of
Yeah.
excited to see, or I don't know if it may not. They may be like, Blake, these suck. I can do nothing with them.
Not at home at the moment. I'm in
Oh no. Yeah.
California. So my wife got them at the house, and she's like, "What is this?" She's like, "What did you buy?" And I'm like, "I didn't buy it. I'm in it doing." But
That sounds like my wife.
yeah, she's like, "You put me on more art." Listen, I owe so much money, right? Like I have so much paint on carpet, and I've even
Yeah. Yeah.
had like cloth, and somehow the paint finds its way off the drop cloth, and so
Yeah. Yeah.
carpet. And my wife's just like, "Okay, well, you have to sell this many paintings to replace the carpets or put in hardwood floor."
Yep.
And I'm transporting paintings around, scuffing up walls. Like, bro, I owe so much money just to fix up my own house because I'm like,
Yeah,
nobody's
dude.
gonna know. Like, it's a big red streak on a white drywall. Like, how's nobody?
Yeah, dude. I think it's all worth it, my friend. So tell me about, your styles. Sorry, go ahead if you're saying something.
Oh, weird spirits. But as soon as my wife saw those, I was like, they're free.
Yeah.
It's all right. Problem. She's like,
See, like I
okay.
didn't have to do the messy stuff, and right now, I don't know.
Pre-podcast, you asked me if anything's off limits. Let me flip that on you. Is there anything off limits to collaborate on? Is there anything I
Oh
can't
no,
do?
no, dude.
All right.
That's my. I think even me coming to Bali now, I'm like my governors and limiters are off. I
Okay.
That's something of bringing my family here and some things like just to so yeah, man. Like I am had this time to do this and like the creative freedom is like ching, everything's off like totally released.
All right.
So no, not of course anything's yeah. So what did you want to talk
I
about?
might because I have a folder. So I do because I work in an office a lot um, that I don't actually have to do work. So I have hours where I taught myself Photoshop. So I'll take the ideas in
Yeah,
my head, I'll make a digital concept on Photoshop, and that way I can play with it. And so that way I have like a 95% solution that I can work off of, you
yeah,
know? And so I have a whole folder of stuff that I'm just like, there's no way I would ever paint this. Like, this is way too far. Like, this is so far beyond the bounds of what is
yeah, dude.
not socially acceptable, but like, I would, it's one of those things of like, you hold yourself back because like, how am I going to justify this when
Right.
somebody sees it? How is somebody? And so those are conversations I don't want to have, but I might just dip into that folder and be like, you know what? Fuck it. Let's really cross the line on this one.
Yeah, and I mean, even you bringing up Dolly is like Dolly. I think got famous by doing exactly that. Everybody like the surrealism movement, and he was just basically did like painted the portrait of the president of it, and with like a huge. You're just like yeah, just continually pushing the boundary. So I'm a habitual like line stepper, so it's okay, dude. I'm there with
All
you.
right. That is really, really off the cuff. And it's inspired by a former president, but it's a
Yeah,
play on
dude.
word. We'll see.
So yeah, I mean, I think that type of art is, I didn't, I think I found a book called Artist Dissident when I was with my family up in Aspen. And I was like, but like, just seeing it's like, wait, I don't know if I'm comfortable with this. And, but it's like, it eventually goes there because I think a creative person like you create opportunities and success out of utter defeat. And I think that you see this in like maybe in in our society, in our world, and our country. And so you just like hey, it's not things are bad or things are whatever your perspective is like, but I could create success out of that. And that's how I think about even how, as you're describing of like doing something really provocative. And I think that works and that gets people's attention.
Yeah.
I digress, but yeah. So I don't know where we're going with that, but yeah, nothing is off limits.
Not committed to it yet because even me, it's a little bit scary, but we'll see.
I'm interested to see. So like let me know if you want
I'll
to
share
use.
a line and tell me if it's too big of a
Okay,
line.
okay, all right. I'm interested. Very very interested. I'd like to touch on maybe going chronologically, artists, and I resonate with you, the fact that like everybody's an artist and, like a child, like, when somebody stops being an artist as a child, that's like their child, that's like them dying, like, somebody saying like, you're not an artist and just like, shut up, that's gay, or whatever that is of like tamping that down because I believe that probably that creativity probably saved your life in the army. I think that maybe saved my life in the Marine Corps of having that spark of imagination and creativity. And so what led you to join the Army and go to West Point?
Well, so I started out with horrible grades in
Yeah.
school. I went to an affluent high school, public high school, where 97% of kids, and this is, in the 90s, pre 9/11, 97% of kids went to college.
Yeah.
And I was in the 3% that wasn't going to college. And so I enlisted. I'd also gotten arrested. And so I had a year of probation in front of me. And so I enlisted. I couldn't enlist into the active duty because of my legal issues. So I ended up in the reserves. And then while I was there, they're like, you were in the wrong line of work. Like I was a mechanic.
Oh yeah.
And like you talk too much, you ask too many questions, specifically why. You just do it. And I'm like, yeah, but when I'm in charge someday, like I got to understand the big picture. And they're like, you aren't going to be in charge of shit. Like you're like going to do your minimum and you're getting out. Like this is not the line. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
But I've always had this kind of like, I'll show you. You said I can't do it. Okay. Got it. So, and it took me a couple years, but I applied to West Point, and I went into Point instead of 17 or 18, I came in, I was 21 as a freshman. I had to spend a couple years figuring out what I wanted to be when I grow up.
Sure.
And then I went to West Point only because I didn't have the money to go to college. And so I was like, oh, free college and they pay you like $500 a month. I'm going to be rich.
Hell yeah.
You know, I was living on $8. I was living in Chicago working for a church to knock out my probation time to show the judge that I was turning my life around. And the church gave me a stipend of $8 a week. And of that $8, I wanted $1 back for offering to show that I was fiscal.
Damn.
So I had to live $7 a week on the inner city of Chicago. And so you're telling me I can go to West Point and you're going to give me $500 a month? Whoa. I'm like, so when I went to West Point and they're like, again, horrible student in high school, horrible soldier. Do you think I was going to be a great cadet? No, the handwriting's on the wall. I was a horrible cadet. So I'd have like in my face yelling at me, you know, a kid that's like 18 years old, 19 years old, yelling at me. I'm 21, but he's an upperclassman. You know, like, why are you even, you're so bad at this. Like, why are you here? I'm like, I'm here for the free college. And they're like, that's all shit. You could go to war someday. It's pre 9/11. And I'm like, where is a peaceful country? What are you talking about? Turns out not. And then when I went to combat, I was in Iraq and I was just like, I kind of like this which is great. And I was like, I'm also kind of good at it. All of a sudden I found like, oh, I kind of am a good soldier. Like, this is amazing. And I think some of it was the creativity side of it was when you're in combat, there's, Mike Tyson says, everybody's got a plan so they get punched in the face. But then what happens when you punch in the face? You got to be able to come up with a plan really quick. And there's no boss over there to like say, oh, well, you mentor you to do it this way. Or that. You better shit a plan like now. I think the people that are mentally agile, people that have more creativity are able to generate options versus script of like the enemy's doing this and I need to do this and the manual says this and by doctrine this is no, man. Like very creative on the spot. And that's when I really found myself not only as a leader but as a soldier. And I realized surprisingly I'm better at this than everybody through, because at that point I'd been in the Army maybe almost 10 years. Reserve point before I got to combat. And so I'd had 10 years of people telling me how bad I was at this or how bad I was going to be. All of a sudden I'm like, I'm actually pretty good at this. That was enough of me tooting my own horn. And so I started looking around and said, well, where else can I be more creative? And so that's how I ended up in Special Forces as a Green Beret, because then you can be as creative as you want. You know, it's just like, figure it out, go win. You know, that my last command, I was like, what do you want me to do? He's like, win. And I'm like, okay. Do I have like just win? And I'm like, got it. Let's go. And that environment, that's enough, you know, commander's guidance. And you have a lot of maneuverability to come up with novel approaches to winning. So,
dude.
But all good things come.
What so you wrote an article on LinkedIn, and I read through it and you talk about the dark side of leadership. I'd love if you expound on that a little bit and kind of give us your thoughts.
I make sure I haven't reread. I don't reread my articles. So
Yeah.
was it about basically the opportunity to fall on your sword, kind of?
Yeah, it was a little bit that. I guess my where I'm thinking of it from the now of like where, I think like in macro sense, maybe from your time in the military, right. Just forget that article. I just want your thoughts now of like your time in the military, your leadership experience, and then like what you see, present day now that you have some hindsight into the military and, that decision making.
Yeah, I saw something on the internet the other day where a general was commenting about the sad state of affairs in the military and how the military's gotten so bad. Attention, lack of recruiting, moral cowardice coming out of Afghanistan, the withdrawal debacle,
Right.
abandoning just from forget strategy,
Yeah.
tactically,
Yeah.
giving up a Bagram before we gave up Kabul, like just, and the general was complaining about, I can't believe it. I'm like, bro,
You
you've been in
did
all
that, right?
30 years.
Uh,
That's you. That's
yeah.
you. Or you had the moral cowardice to not say something,
Yeah, dude.
right? So you're going to
Yeah.
armchair basically like a schoolyard bully and be like, and point out the failures in others instead of taking ownership.
Yeah.
So I think leadership from that standpoint is in combat. A lot of guys like combat because it's very efficient. You
Yeah.
strip away the dog and the pony. You strip away all those officers and soldiers and sergeants who look really good in garrison or back at home with the shiny boots, and they play the game. They know how to kiss ass, and that's defined as good leadership. You're a fast runner, you must be a good leader. And yet, when you're in combat, and none of that stuff matters. Is can you
Yeah.
win? Can you take boys out? Can you conduct a mission? And can you bring them successful? Right? Did you complete the mission and did you bring your guys home? Nothing to do with shiny boots generation. It's much more gritty and things just make more sense. You strip away all the superfluous pieces of flair that you're required to wear and you just
Yeah.
stay focused on what matters. And then, the next day you're back home and all of a sudden I was getting dinged. I'm like, looks like your uniform wasn't ironed. I'm like, yeah, obviously I just got let out of a duffel bag and I think it's clean. I'm not sure. Like, oh, that's right. And they're like, when you're back home, you need to flip this switch and play the game again. And I'm like, but I'm going back in like 3 months. I don't want to
Yeah.
flip the switch. It's too
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
Everything to get back into the game. And it's like, so I think from a leadership standpoint, knowing your audience, knowing your people, and then catering your leadership approach to so many changing variables.
Yeah.
But you only do that effectively if you know your people and know where they're at that given moment. Before you come in and you approach somebody, do you even know if they're having a good day? And
Yeah.
is this the right moment to have this conversation? Or can you back off, maybe do a tactical pause, a tactical retreat, and come at it from another angle?
Yeah.
I think people's egos are riding on their leadership approach and they need to be right now.
Yeah.
Man, maybe 20 years ago, I was a little bit more dogmatic and black and white. Now I'm just, hey man, it's what everything that I worried about in the past, I've found as I gotten older, don't matter.
Yeah.
And to include leadership styles and techniques, right? It all boils down to how well do you know your people and
Yeah.
can you, your behavior and your vision based off of the variables that they're bringing to the table as well. Too many people try to follow a script. That's my thoughts.
Yeah. Do you have any like culminating moments, like either garrison or combat or just deployed that comes to mind for leadership or funny, like anything, like what comes to mind, good, bad, or ugly?
See, yeah, there was a moment on. Yeah, I'll tell you about one mission. So I was a 18 Alpha. I was a Green Beret commander in Afghanistan, and my commanders, my commander was doing a change of command. Right, so they came out to our outpost. They needed to see all the equipment, change of command inventory. And the guy leaving, he hated me. I didn't play the dog and pony game. Been counseled many times throughout my career as an officer. You're not a good officer. You don't play the game well. As if in the game well in politics was a key indicator on your success as an officer, which it is. If you measure success by climbing and getting promoted, bad at that game, and I still am to this day. It's not that I'm bad at it. I just don't want to play. And so there's 6 A teams or 6 ODAs in a company. And so for all intents and purposes, my team was ranked number 6, according to my commander. Had nothing to do with our mission success. We had very, very high mission success. Had nothing to do with our team culture or our bonding or our ability to influence the battlefield and shape the battlefield tactically for strategic implications. That's not how he ranked us. Was how much just did I play the game well? Did I kiss his ass? Did I want to ride his coattails? And emphatically, the answer was no. So he comes out for a mission or for a change of command inventory, and we had been we'd been working on something for a couple weeks. I mean, the story's cooler if I go into details. I'm just not sure how many details I can say. Let's just say we were watching and we were working double agents. So we had a guy who was working for us as a source. He was also happened to be working as a Taliban guy, which guess what? Most of them are. But he was, double dipping. But he was feeding information to both sides. He was ratting us out, but he was also ratting them out. So he's basically whoever's going to give him more money, that's who he was going to be a little bit more loyal to.
Risky game, but all right.
Risky because killed by either side, right?
Yeah.
So he's like, hey, man, I got hired to transport a bunch of explosives into Kabul. There's going to be a really big attack, and we got to get all of this explosives into Kabul. So they hired me to smuggle it. All right. He's like, can you get me a truck? Sure, we can get you a truck. And so we're like, all right, now we need to make false floors. We were really playing with fire on this one. We need to make false floors and everything like this. So we get our contracting firm, civilian guy, and we're like, hey, man, we need to weld in these false floors, false bottoms, all this side compartments and make it look like it's nice. He goes, listen, guys, if you guys want to move a bunch of drugs, then just pop the tires and put it in there. And we're like, bro, what are you talking about right now? He goes, are you guys smuggling meth? What? We're like, I'm sure there's a backstory to this, but I'm not going to ask. Like, what are you talking about? I was like, no, man, let's just make some false floors. He's like, okay, no problem. So we set up this truck and we put a bunch of like Gee Whiz, James Bond Q technology on it so we don't lose the truck. So we send out our guy to go pick up this explosives, and we're going to track him into the city and then have partnered with another Afghan organization to follow the stuff, map out the network, right? And then instead of taking down one target, we can take out a whole network of people. And really that back, right? To build a network takes time, years, money. And if we could take down a network, that would be the coup de grace, right? You could set the condition for a safe Kabul for an extended period of time to allow the forces and the government to establish themselves. That was right, to buy the government time. So we were told, hey, they're going to probably move 1,000 pounds of explosives at a time. All right, cool, no problem. So we're watching via drone footage, and my 2 commanders are out there, and the new guy coming in, he pulled me aside and he goes, listen, man, whatever happens, if you meet trigger, which means the criteria to go on this mission, he goes, I'm going. And I'm like, yeah, no, you're too high ranking. Like, you can't come on this mission. He's like, listen, ladder, like whatever you need me to do. He goes, and the other guy will come with me. And I was like, oh, absolutely not that guy. He's a jellyfish. He's got no being out here. And he's like, no, man, this will be the highest paid ladder team ever in history. Like, we got this. I'm like, okay. So we meet criteria and we're like, all right, we're going to go in a couple hours. So my old commander goes over to my weapons guy and he's like, hey, man, can I borrow a weapon? My guy's like, hush hush, like, hey, what? Step inside this room real quick. One of my sergeants like, step inside. Say that again to me. You're the commander, and you want to borrow a weapon because you don't have a weapon with you. Like what? And yeah, no, he kind of just was out there in the middle of the hinterland, Afghanistan, and he had forgotten his rifle. So yeah, so he borrows a rifle that's not his. So we give him a rifle. He wants a flashlight on it. He wants all this like gee whiz commando stuff on it. You know, we're all rocking Peltors, and he's got like the throat. You know, like what anything that Charlie Sheen Navy SEAL movie. That's what he right. That's what he looked like. The rest of us are like, hey man, let's just get the job done. So we roll out on this mission, and while we're rolling to interdict, we're watching the video feed, and my CCT in the back, Chris Rush, rest in peace. He took his life, but a solid guy, made everybody laugh. Great guy. He's watching. He's like, hey, bro, you want to activate the QRF. You want to spin up some helicopters, and you're going to want to get some jets on station. Like, this is going to go down. I was like, what are you talking about? He goes, yeah, that one source that you think you're just going to like get the truck from, there's 27 dudes out there. And I'm like, oh, shit. So we get everything spun up. We're too close to like pull back. We have Romanians running checkpoints for us. We got some Danish Jaeger Corps, which is like their tier 1 Delta Force guys with us. We're solid individuals. And so we're rolling, and the roads get too narrow, so we can't get our there. So we're going to lose machine gun coverage as well. And so we got to go in on foot. And so we start busting out of the vehicles, and they see us coming, they hear us coming, and they start coming over the radio like they're squirting everywhere. And so we have no idea where these guys are going, what buildings they're going to. And so this trying to control this crazy objective is like, okay, now we're going to have to clear, and basically an entire village by ourselves, because who knows where these guys are at. And so we roll up because we're like, we got 1,000 pounds of ammunition or 1,000 pounds of explosives, one thing, but the whole idea was to get the network, and apparently they're all here. But unfortunately, there's only like 17 of us out right now.
Yeah.
And so we're running down this tiny little alley. It's maybe 5 feet wide. You got like an 8-foot mud wall on one side, and you got culottes or mud brick buildings on another side. And we're running with our Afghan commandos, and we're coming across intersections, and we're doing kind of like this Australian peel. So front guy covers down on the alley, and everybody just blasts right past him. And so I'm coming up in full sprint, and I see this guy pulling cover down this alley, and he illuminates the entire thing. We're running under night vision, and he illuminates the entire thing with his white light, which, if you've ever worked with Afghanistan's, at least ours, they like to play, and as well-trained as they were, right, we trained the fuck out of them. They still like to play this little like fuck game, which was like, how hard could they put pressure on the tack light button without it going off? It's just I don't know what was wrong with them. And so I'm thinking, oh man, it's one of these guys playing fuck games with the tack light. And so as I run past him, I take my left hand and I smack his weapon out of his hand, right? He's got a sling on. And so it's just going to, get his thumb off of the thing. And I turn around in a right across the jaws, like, you motherfucker, thinking I'm just hitting my buddy Najib, and guys in an American accent. And I'm like, oh no, that one was. But when you're with a small team of guys, you can tell who people are based off how like they. When you're like such a good team, and to like this flow state where you can just feel somebody's next to you and you know who it is. You become like this single organism. And even like at distance under night vision, I'm like, that's his silhouette. I can tell that's his medical pouch on the upper left side and I know who that is. You memorize these silhouettes in the darkness. And I'm like, so I just assumed it was an Afghan commando because I didn't recognize the silhouette.
Yeah, I feel like I know where this is going, but continue.
Who thought I was already in last place, and I just right across on the objective. And so I'm sitting, it turns out, why did they have 27 guys is because they didn't have 1,000 pounds of explosives. They had 22,000 pounds of explosives. So they were, instead of doing 1,000 pounds at a time, they were going to send all the explosives in at one time, which tells me they had all the checkpoint guys paid off,
Yeah.
right? So there was no rolling this network, that it was polluted and corrupt across the board. We're 300 miles away from Kabul, so that's 300 miles of corruption. Like, if we had not grabbed this, we were never going to get it back. And so, for context, I think the Oklahoma City bombing was like 3,000 or 4,000 pounds. You want to fact check me on that? This was magnitudes in order
Yeah.
over the, like, Oklahoma City bombing, is what they were packing in the back of this jingle truck. So our jingle truck now.
Yeah.
If you give a vehicle to somebody to do something nefarious, make sure you got copies of the key, because our guy, who's a double agent, scrambled just like the other 26 with the keys.
Yeah.
So now my warrant is in there with like a screwdriver and a K-bar, trying to like jam it in there and hot wire a jingle truck. Can't get it out of second gear, so we got like 20 miles to go in second gear, and bad Indian. Oh gosh, like I should have thought of that.
Yeah.
So as soon as
Yeah.
I get back, I'm typing up my reports, and the old outgoing commander puts his hand on my shoulder, and he's like, "I just need to say I'm sorry." And I'm like, "Oh," he goes, "That guy you punched was me." And I'm like, "Yeah, I kind of figured." And I'm like, he knows he fucked up, and I was in the right, and blah blah blah. Yeah, by the next morning, I was back on his shit list.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
new commander coming in pulls me aside, and he goes, "Hey man, I know you're down. Like, the guy told me, he's like, you're gonna get the worst rating. I'm gonna rewrite your officer evaluation report. You're fucking done." And the new guy pulls me aside. He goes, "Don't listen to that guy, man. You're good." He goes, You're number one in my book." And I still stay in contact with that guy. I've actually
Yeah.
done quite a few for him, because
Yeah.
he went to battle for me when he became commander within the first 15 minutes.
Okay.
The first thing the battalion commander wanted him to do was to fire me on the spot in combat. And he said, absolutely not. Like, he goes, "You fire him, you fire me at the same time." And I was like, "Bro, you don't owe me anything. You're a brand new commander. Like, you don't owe me anything. Like, you could easily throw me away. I've been discarded so many times by bad leaders, and I've gotten this far. Like, I'll figure it out." Like, and he goes,
Yeah.
"No, that's not what leaders do." And he pulled me aside again. He goes, "Listen," he goes, "if you're a leader and you've made so much rank, it's either you've gotten lucky, because you never had to fall on your sword." He goes, "But at some point, if you stay in this game, you will have the opportunity to fall on your sword for your guys." He goes,
Yeah.
"Do the right thing for the right people. If they deserve it, then it's the honorable thing to do." And he goes, "And this is what I'm supposed to do as a leader." And I've never, never not forgotten that moment and that lesson. So a couple lessons there. Like, yeah, you can move forward if you play the game. I've never spoken to that guy again, and I don't even know whatever happened to him. But the guy who
Yeah.
did right by me, I've spent the last 15 years trying to do right by him and pay him back for
Yeah, dude.
having that honorable intention. And to the day I die, I'll never forget just that simple gesture. If you want him, you got to take me too. And I'm like, oh, that's leadership.
Yeah.
You
Yeah. I
know?
think that type of action you can't teach a guy to do that. That's
Yeah.
unteachable.
It comes from the soul. It comes from the heart. And it
Exactly.
says
Exactly.
out there. Yeah. So shout
Yeah,
out to Roby.
yeah, dude, that's well said. Good story. Kind of going into the next thing I'd like to chat about is probably psychedelics, and I think that I think both of us have experience with them, and I think with using as a tool, using as a tool is an incredibly helpful. And you just mentioned that you have a friend who took his life, and we both have friends that have taken their lives, and I think it's somewhere between 20 and 40 veterans commit suicide a day, which
Yeah.
is absolutely bonkers, because I don't even know how that could even support the amount of veterans could even support that number. Like, we're all going to be extinguished out soon. Like, well, what it's insane. That number is insane to me. So
Yes.
that being said, yeah, is like, so what's I would love just what's your experience with those, because I think it ties, and that, you just gave me a story from combat, life and death. And I don't think a lot, I don't think veterans have to experience their buddy getting shot next to them. I think it's what you sacrifice and give for service and whatever it is, your time you give away, because people don't commit suicide because they saw their buddy die. Like they do it for every other reason you can imagine. But I'd love to hear, your kind of story, maybe of why and how you found it and some details, because I know we know some people in that similar area, but like to get your thoughts and experience.
So I lived overseas for about 14 years. I moved back. Um, you still hear me?
Yeah, I still got you. Let me see. We're gonna. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you. I just don't see you, but I just want to pause just in case you lost connectivity. But I'll keep going.
Yeah,
Um,
it looks like my connection is probably going from Wi-Fi here, but I've got you loud and clear, and I got your
okay.
video still.
Yeah. So I moved back to the United States, and I met a guy named Marcus Stone, and he was going through some things as well, and so we kind of bonded over just shit in our life.
Yeah,
Um, and he went on to found Veteran Solutions, which is psychedelic treatments for special operations guys,
yeah,
using Ibogaine and DMT-5-MeO. And he identified very early on. He was very honest with me. He's like, "Hey, man, you need help," and I'm like, "I'm fine, bro. I'm fine." He's like, "All right, all right." And he'd check in with me like every 6 months. He's like, "Are you ready?" And I'm like, "Bro, I'm good. I'm good." And after a couple of years, I started doing my own research, and uh, finally, I got to the point where I was like, I'm doing a lot of effort, and I'm doing everything I know to do, work hard, and on myself, on everything like
yeah,
that. And I'd have my wife, and I'm like, I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try harder next time. It's like I've spent 15 years of marriage at this point, always trying harder. And what I quickly realized was all I was doing was digging a hole in wet sand. And the harder I dug to try to work myself out of the situation, the worse I got buried in it.
yeah,
And quickly, I just got depressed, and I was like, I can't do this by myself. And there's and once you become, I think there's a couple things that we could talk about. Is the stigma of depression, which you just feel helpless, and your brain becomes toxic, right? Your ideas of what seems normal or what's rational to a healthy brain is insanity. And so ideas like suicide come into your brain because you're like, all right, well, I'm miserable. I'm making everybody else around me miserable. I've worked for years to try to dig myself out of this. I can't, which means the situation is not going to get better. And if everybody else is suffering because of me, and it's not going to get better, it's only going to get worse because I have a track record of the more I try, the worse it gets, which means everybody else's life around me is going to get worse. I have kids. I'm going to make their life worse. Therefore, the bravest thing I can do, and a lot of people I think who've never faced suicide legitimately and depression think that suicide is the coward's way out. How
yeah,
could you do that to your wife? How could you do that to your kids? They're going to be struggling. They'll have therapy. And yes, to a healthy brain, that sounds completely normal. To an unhealthy, toxic brain, the rationale in the brain is the best thing I can do for the health of my family so that my kids have a chance to grow up in a healthy environment absent of me, which is nothing but toxic, right? This is all self talk, right? You've
yeah,
convinced yourself toxic. The bravest thing I can do, the best thing I can do, the ultimate act of love towards my family is to actually take my life so they have a chance to be free. Right. And so that's kind of where I found myself. Multiple people interacted in my life in very crucial moments. But I reached back out to Marcus and I said, Marcus, I think it's time. There was other people involved. A guy named Ryan, guy named Jaime, a guy named Tony. Various people came in at various points and got me off track by a couple degrees, right?
Yeah.
And that was those added up enough for me to be like, okay, Marcus, I'm ready. I've tried everything I can under my own power, and I can't do it. I was going to church every Sunday. I was working security at church, so I was there all day. So I heard 3 sermons a day. So to anybody who's like, "Oh, you just needed to go to church," bro, I heard 3 sermons a day. Like nothing was connecting because my brain was so toxic.
Yeah.
Now, when I finally read the operator syndrome white paper, had a chance to talk with the author of that, one of the authors of it, which talks about micro and the cumulative effects of TBI. So micro TBI. Let's say you get hit in the head with a sledgehammer or an IED or a VBID, or you get, well, that's a lot of points towards TBI. But if
Yeah.
that never happened to you, you think, oh, well, I must be just crazy because I don't have TBI. I never got knocked unconscious. But I started out in artillery. It's a lot of concussions. It's a lot of sound. And then through special forces and demolition charges and blowing up doors and blowing up buildings and cratering charges and things like that, all of that has a cumulative effect in your brain. And so what a healthy brain would choose to do is not necessarily what an unhealthy damaged brain would choose to do. And that's why I said just have empathy if you have someone in your life who's struggling with depression and thoughts of suicide. You're not going to make whatever logical argument you're going to make to them will not make sense to them, right? In their mind, they think they're doing the best thing that they can for everyone around them, and just from my own anecdotal, it was not a selfish act. It was an act of love. That's how I rationalized it. So I went in and I decided I have no other options. Like I've tried everything. I joined the army when I was 17. Never did drugs. Never smoked. Didn't use tobacco. Not a drinker. And so I have a friend who does recreational drugs, and I said, "Hey, I'm gonna go do this thing." He does psychedelics. I'm gonna go do this thing called Ibogaine, and he's like jaw dropped. He's like, "You're gonna what?" I go, "Yeah, like, do you know anything about it? You do drugs all the time. Like, have you ever done it?" He goes, "That's the one drug I will never take." He goes, "You go to my house. We need to get you like inoculated. We're going to start with beer, and then we're going to do like marijuana, and then mushrooms, and then ecstasy, and LSD, and we're gonna build you up. You cannot go into Ibogaine cold turkey. Like you've never even had a cigarette. Are you kidding me?" And I'm like, so I call up Marcus and I'm like, "Hey man, like my buddy says this is a really bad idea, and I need to do all these other drugs before I can do Ibogaine." He goes, "No man." He goes, "Just come in cold turkey. You'll be fine. You've you've done worse." And I'm like, "Oh yeah." He goes, "You're tough, right?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "You're brave." "Yeah." He goes, "You're fine." And I'm like, oh yeah. Play to my ego. I'm a tough guy. It was the worst experience of my life.
Yeah.
It was mentally, physically also hurt, right? So I threw up quite a bit. So I was under the influence for about 18 hours, threw up well over 30 times. Blood sugar was crap. They were feeding me sugar because I need to eat like, this intermittent fasting thing, that ain't for me. I need to eat like 17 times a day.
Yeah.
And when you're on Ibogaine, you do not want to eat. So they're like giving me Jolly Ranchers, like, "Hey, bro, because you're hooked up to an EKG. It's a very great medical environment, right? And I got a registered nurse paying attention to just you all night long." So I can't speak highly enough of the operation itself. But mentally, worst experience of my life. But I came out on the other side. And the great thing about Ibogaine is it's not, when people hear psychedelics, they think LSD, tripping balls, seeing colors, and all this stuff. Ibogaine is a medicine, right? It has scientifically, medically research backed. Stanford's doing a great, you can just type in Ibogaine, special operations, Stanford, something like along those lines. And you're going to get a lot of very recent studies being done about Ibogaine and the neuroregenerative properties of it. So it's not about getting high. No, even my druggy friends were like, "Fuck that noise." That's it's
Yeah.
horrible. But
Yeah.
it generates brain tissue. It heals and promotes nerve growth. So all
Yeah.
the implications of operator syndrome, of being concussed, being around artillery, being around grenades and demolitions, all the impact frays the ends of the nerves. What Ibogaine does, it actually goes in there and it heals the ends of the nerves, right?
Yeah.
And frayed ends is directly tied to risky behavior, toxic thoughts, all these things that we do to try to cope, drinking, sex,
Yeah.
promiscuity, whatever your thing is.
Yeah.
Everybody's got their own, whatever it is that you're trying to then calm those nerves down, right? You're trying to numb
Yeah.
those nerves and just have quiet in your head for just a little bit until it wears off, and then you're right back into that risky behavior to try
Yeah.
to calm the demons. Well, Ibogaine goes in there and it actually heals the nerves. You don't need the risky behavior. You don't need the drugs. You don't need the alcohol. You don't need whatever your vice
Yeah.
is that you're trying to use to calm your. It heals it, and it gives you time to rewire and rebuild relationships, get rid of bad relationships, and rebuild healthy relationships. Um, I came home and my wife, like on the third day, she pulls me as I just like would jump into the room and I'd be like, "I love you. You're so beautiful." And then I jump back out. I'm like, "Is there anything I can do for you right now?" And she's like, "What?" And I'm like, "You're just so awesome. I'm just amazed by you." And she's like, "You're high." And I'm like, "I'm not high. I'm a different
Yeah.
person now." And so she pulls me aside and she like opens up Google and she said, "Top 10 signs that your husband is cheating on you."
Oh
And
my
she's
God.
like, "You're every single one of these. If I didn't know you were high, I'd think you were." I mean, I'm like, "I'm not high. The new me." And she goes,
Yeah. Yeah. That's hilarious. Oh my gosh.
"Rich, you've told me this is the new you." And I'm like, "But this time it's real." I wasn't lying in the past, but I was trying to do it under my own strength.
Yeah.
Now I'm on a different trajectory. And it took her, I knew it immediately. When I woke up, well, you don't really go to sleep. But when I woke up the next day after I crashed out for a while, I woke up knowing I'm healed. The effects in my brain were
Yeah.
immediate from the Matrix. You know, when Neo in the first one, he like gets uploaded with how to fly a helicopter. He's like, "Patch, I need to fly a helicopter." He's like, "Bzzz." And he's like, "Oh, I know how to do that." Okay, just
Yeah.
do that in reverse. That's what Ibogaine did for me. It's, do you know how to fight? Do you know how to kill? Do you know how to teach other people how to kill? Are you good at it? Do you have a lot of experience? And how do we do that? We dehumanize. We have to strip away your natural inclination to not hurt somebody, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, my kids are in jujitsu, and I'm like, "Just choke them," and they're like, "I don't want to hurt them." That's
Yeah.
natural. That's
Yeah.
normal, right?
Yeah.
And as adults, we have that, but the military conditions you to. That's why we don't shoot at bullseyes. We shoot at silhouettes, right? It's conditioning to take a human life. It's not natural. So it's like I had all of these skills, but all the dehumanization process that I had gone through over 16 and a half years total in the military, it's as if all that dehumanization conditioning had been stripped away in one night. And I had all the knowledge still, but I didn't have the anger, the resentment, the jadedness that went with it. The
Yeah.
blackness in my heart had been released. Um, and the other guys that I was there with from MARSOC, from other units, they were all like, that was the commonality, was the darkness in my life is gone. Yeah, it's been a game changer. It's been a couple of years now, and I've never looked back to the old ways.
Have you thought like that was like kind of like a boom, like a hit, and you're just like, like the door opened, the healing. Like I guess my question is like, do you see of like having to redo it, or is like that was like a game changing experience, for you?
I have no desire to do drugs. I have no desire to do mushrooms. I have no
Mm.
desire to even dabble in it. I'm not opposed to it, right? But I don't necessarily. So one thing I took away, the provider there, a guy named Trevor, he was just like, "Listen," he goes, you've come here at a time. It's almost as if the universe or anybody who's never done plant-based medicine is going to think this sounds crazy, but it's as if there's a oneness and a connectivity, and you've been brought here at the right time, the right place. And when you need to do things, right, you'll be spoken to. It will
Yeah.
call you, and you'll know
Yeah.
it. It won't just be like, oh, I think I'm gonna try this. No, you'll know you'll know what medicine you need to take. You
Yeah.
don't need a doctor. It's almost as if the medicine tells you what your next medicine prescription is, as if the medicine is sentient. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I've never had the calling to need another dose of medicine. So much so that everybody else who have the chance to do Ibogaine and 5-MeO DMT, and I didn't take the DMT. I had gotten so much out of the Ibogaine, and they're like, oh,
Yeah.
DMT, it's 5-MeO. It's only 15 to 45 minutes. Maybe you want to 15 minutes, 20 minutes. If you want to go again, you can go double it up. I was like, man, I just did 18 hours. My life's been changed.
Yeah.
God
Yeah.
spoke to me. I was face
Yeah.
to face with God. And I, beyond a shadow of doubt, I knew exactly who it was. And he healed me. He
Yeah.
forgave me. I'm a new man. And at this point, I would just feel like I'm being greedy. You know,
Yeah.
I don't
I
I
do.
don't need
Yeah.
I don't need to talk to God again. I just did yesterday. I don't need to go talk to him again today through another vehicle, right? Through another medicine. I'm good. And that was a couple years ago, and I've never felt the urge. I'm not opposed to it, but I haven't had that call. The medicine hasn't called me.
How has that shaped your faith from that experience to now?
That's a great question. So I was raised in church. I worked for the church for a whole year. I had the pastor there he's very famous now. He's on the national stage in the Hispanic community. Because I was in a inner city Puerto Rican neighborhood, and he pulled me aside one day because everybody else that was there in this program wanted to be pastors.
Oh.
I was there because I was there
Yeah.
trying to show the judge my life wasn't as messed up as the judge thought I was.
I'm redeemable. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody else was there for a reason. They were there for like religious reasons. Like there's the book taught and the street taught. So this program is
Yeah.
more street ministry
Yeah.
and to not go to jail. So I was raised a Christian. My parents are devout, very strict conservative Christians, evangelical. And so I was raised that way. And yet I never felt I think a lot, as I think back on it, I would say that I've had a connection, but I think a lot of times as a kid, you're trying to have your parents' approval. And so I would say, oh yeah, I feel God talking to me. I feel this. And I was trying to fake it till I make it. I never had that. I was never convinced. I've worked for churches. I've played church bands as drummer, and I've done it all, man. And I never really genuinely felt like I had a real connection. And then I have a brother-in-law who's a minister, and I was explaining it to him. He goes, do you read C.S. Lewis? I go, no. He goes, everything you just described is exactly how C.S. Lewis describes it. I'm like, really? Who knew? From my experiences, I don't want to get into my whole like hell journey. But basically, I went on my healing trip. I was in hell, and I called out, and I said, I can't take it anymore. I'm going insane. And that's one thing about the plants, and that's why I said the word sentient. You can talk to the medicine. I was like, I can't take it anymore. Like, whatever you're teaching me, take me somewhere else. And so I kind of was laying in bed, and I could see off in the distance this small little golden face. And the way and gold is, I would have to tell you my entire journey to explain that. But so I see this small little gold face, and it's getting closer to me, and I'm like, oh, that's me as a little kid, like 4 years old. I was such a cute little toddler. And as I get closer, I see that it's my son. And in that moment, I realized, and I hadn't broken at this point. Guys were having breakthroughs early on in the journey. And this is 16, 17 hours in, and I really hadn't had a breakthrough yet. And I noticed that, oh, I am my son, and my son is me. And all the toxicity and all the shit that I'm bringing into his life as a father who's damaged, right? There's a great song Rage Against the Machine called "Son of a Broken Man," and I personified all that toxic life, and I started screaming. I was just not complete abandoned, wail. I felt that because I saw son, and in front of me was a being. It's not a being as you like, but there was a being there, but it's more of an essence. It was a presence. Um, and beyond a shadow of a doubt, I knew I was standing in front of the Creator. And I opened present, and the first words out of my mouth were, "You can't be here now. You have to leave." And he's like, "Why?" And he didn't even say like it was there was no words. It was communicating ideas, and I was trying to explain. You have to leave. You have to leave. I'm feeling all these feelings of love, acceptance, rejection. You can't love me. You don't know me well enough to love me. If you knew me, you would. And I made it 2 years ago, and I'm reliving it. It made me to tears. Such a powerful. Um, in my mind, thinking of all my sin and all the bad things I've done in my life, and without saying anything, he said, "This is the only time he talked to me. Otherwise, he was just communicating ideas and feelings. The only words he ever said was, 'I forgave you before you even asked.'" And, oh, it just crushed me. And like that, he was gone.